The master of Ravenloft is having guests for dinner, and you're invited. So of course, in this module, we are given several instances of if your players do this, then Strahd invites them to dinner. If your players do that, they are invited to dinner. But you see, the thing is while there seems to be a big build-up for this dinner, in all actuality, we don't get too much information. So I want to go over many different ways on how this dinner can go down, because I certainly believe that dinner with Strahd should be a delightful experience that will be remembered for ages to come. So of course, this art, beautiful. Look up James RPG art if you haven't already. Fantastic stuff, not just for Curse of Strahd, but for all the modules that he's done so far. Great stuff. This is what your players see. Your players spot this magnificent dining table and a big old chandelier, a lit fireplace, a massive organ, and Strahd playing it up. This should resonate with them. But of course, there's something to note about this dining room. While grand as it is and as luxurious as it is lonely. There is only the players and there is Strahd. Now, of course, this can make things very intimate. This can make it so that your players feel special, as they should. But you see, the thing is I like to add more. I like the idea that your players aren't the only ones having dinner with Strahd. There could be others. And of course, this gives more options and allows your players to roleplay with more people. You see in the book, when your players are given the invitation to have dinner with Strahd, they can go ahead and make their way up here without any issue at all. They never encounter anything deadly. And of course, they can take a carriage ride, which is certainly a delight, versus probably what they've already been doing this whole time and just walking. They can go ahead and take this carriage ride up, all the way up to the castle, make their way across the bridge, and enter here. And they will see it, this magnificent looming castle which dominates the area and of course overlooks the village of Barovia. Your players make their way inside, they'll see all these dragon statues, but they shouldn't come to life, of course. Your players make their way inside and see gargoyles, and once again, they shouldn't come to life. Your players look to the side, and they see Rahadin stepping down and greets them and says, "My master is expecting you." At which point, Rahadin will guide them to the dining room. Now, once again, we're given information that as soon as Rahadin opens the door and lets everyone in, he simply closes the door behind them and retreats to area K72. But why? Why wouldn't Rahadin go ahead and converse with the party? Why wouldn't he go ahead and stick by the person that he adores so much? Well, of course, we know the answer to that. That's because Strahd isn't actually here. This is merely an illusion. We get this big ol' long list of text here that states, "The figure is an illusion of Strahd. It welcomes the characters and invites them to dine. The illusion acts like Strahd and plays the part of a gracious host, speaking kindly and telling the characters that they're free to explore the castle. Strahd might talk about his family or shed light on the castle's history, but the illusion provides no useful information about the castle's inhabitants, treasures, or dangers other than to say the castle doesn't receive many guests. The illusory vampire converses with the characters for no more than 3 rounds, never moving from the organ bench. When the time is up, or if the illusion is attacked, it simply disappears in a mocking laugh." So that is clearly a holdover from older editions of D&D, because of course, in 5th edition, a round is only 6 seconds, but back then, rounds were a little bit longer than that. Now, 2 ways we immediately change this up. 1, get rid of the timer. Allow the illusion of Strahd to converse with the party as much as your players desire. If you're not running a game where your players interact with Strahd on a regular basis, then this is a great time to sit down. If your players are courteous and actually sit down and start talking to Strahd, then that's fantastic. That's great role-playing, and it creates a tense scene. They just got invited to the enemy's home base, and they're having a delightful conversation. That is amazing. Now, of course, the other aspect of this is, why have an illusion? Why wouldn't Strahd be here? Maybe Strahd likes the idea of toying with these people so much, and he knows how strong he is and how weak the players are, that he's willing to go ahead and sit down right there in front of them. That would show off how incredibly powerful he is, that he's willing to sit down and dine with his enemies. And this could be a really great tense scene as well if there is more people involved. Of course, we have Strahd on the side, and we have Rahadin on the other, And that allows your players to go ahead and split up and converse with other people. They can talk to Rahadin for a bit, and Rahadin can, of course, graciously talk to them. And, of course, they can talk to Strahd. And that adds this fun, dynamic ball setting that your players can go ahead and talk to whoever they want. The whole buildup of Dinner with Strahd is something that's really important to consider in your campaign. Do your players regularly interact with Strahd or Rahadin or any of the brides or any of the other inhabitants of Castle Ravenloft? If they do, then hey, this can be a fun, cordial term. But if they don't regularly interact with these people, maybe this is the only time they ever get to see the brides or Rahadin, then this is fun. Your players want to interact with more named NPCs that have character and flair to them, so go ahead and give it to them. Now see, this looks like a fun dinner to have here. Your players show up to Castle Ravenloft for the very first time. They get let in, introduced by Rahadin, and there they meet them, the brides of Strahd, Ludmilla, Anastasia, Volenta, and Escher. That is a fun bunch to be eating and drinking with. You can play up so much flavor in regards of how they interact with each other, and most important of all, how they act with the individual players. And depending on how many players you have in the party, you can go ahead and split them up across this table where they get to interact one-on-one with any one person, and you can go ahead and go around the table, literally, as they are talking to other members of the court. That is exciting. Now, mind you, this might be a little intimidating, the fact that your players are being surrounded by a whole bunch of vampire spawn. Maybe they want some familiar faces. Now, there are some familiar faces your players may recognize, and that would be entertaining, right? Your players show up to Castle Ravenloft not knowing what to expect, but here they find not only themselves, but also some of the friends or possible enemies that they've made along the way. That would add a lot more dynamics to this encounter. Your players aren't only thinking about their own well-being and safety, they also have to think about other people that they've met along the way. If your players accidentally free Doru, then Doru can be found here in the castle. He could be acting as a waiter. He could be acting as just a simple maid and is just cleaning around the place. Father Donovich, while he was up and cleaning the church, was simply nabbed and taken all the way to this castle where he's sitting here. And unfortunately for him, he is sat here and is probably feeling uncomfortable. Why would Strahd want to kidnap Father Donovich? Well, that's because Strahd wants Donovich to officiate his wedding with Irina. And speaking of Irina, we have her brother Ismark. Strahd doesn't care about Ismark per se, but of course he knows that he could use Ismark to his advantage. He could go ahead and laud it over that he has Ismark in his possession and maybe convinces Irina to show up to the castle. Now, Ismark is a pretty strong individual, and he's relatively smart. And unfortunately for him, he's smart enough to know that he wouldn't be able to take Strahd one-on-one. So if he gets invited here or he gets dragged here, he's not going to fight back. He knows better of it. Of course, another fun interaction you could have is your players dealt with Henrik Vandervoot, and now all of a sudden see him later on. And it's here where you can go ahead and explain that none of the things that happened at the coffin maker's shop were his fault. It's because Strahd and his forces put him up to it. And that could add some relief to some of your players that suspect otherwise, but also could show how powerful and how influential Strahd can be, that he's willing to go ahead and just grab people even from the inside of Vallaki. Now, the dinner itself can be excellent. Your players go ahead and sit down and converse with any number of people that make their way in here, whether that be old friends, potential new enemies, or whoever else they decided to engage with in here. The dinner itself will be entertaining, your players talking and learning a bit about the history of the world and the castle and previous lives and all those various things, but all good things must come to an end. Now, of course, in the module itself, we get all this information about how everything closes up and now they find themselves locked in Castle Ravenloft, where they're going to have to battle it out and claw their way all around. But you see, this is something that you would do if you wanted to end the campaign. I personally think that there's more than one approach to this. Because of course in the module, it's expected that your players receive an invitation to Strahd's castle once they're near the end of the campaign, once they are much higher level. How about you go ahead and invite your players early on? Let's say you invite your players when they're only even maybe 3rd level, 4th level, 5th level? Because you see, if you invite your players early on to Castle Ravenloft, they should have some sort of expectation about what's going on here, and hopefully they understand that things don't always have to come down to combat. Things can be cordial, things can be nice, and this allows your players to actually interact more with the enemies, giving them more screen time, and thus making them much more memorable villains and antagonists. So yes, we invite your players to Castle Ravenloft very early on, but what changes? Here's what changes. Once you players sit down and have a delightful dinner, conversing with everyone, and it gets rather late, Rahadin simply tells them to raise up and escorts them off the castle grounds, where they can go ahead and return to from over which they came. Throughout the course of the campaign, we don't want to give your players just one opportunity to explore Castle Ravenloft. We want to give your players multiple chances. So while the first time your players are invited to Castle Ravenloft, yes, it's just a simple polite dinner where they can interact with maybe just Strahd and Rahadin, or maybe one of the brides, or many more of the brides, depending on how much roleplay you want. But of course, at the end of the night, the players are removed from the castle. However, after some amount of in-game time, they're invited back to Castle Ravenloft. And it's here where we can go ahead and add some dynamicism to this. Your players get invited the first time and they meet with one bride. Well, the second time they get invited, they meet another bride. But in addition to that, the second time they get invited to Castle Ravenloft, Rahadin simply walks out, and this allows your players to go ahead and explore around the castle grounds some more. Now, mind you, they shouldn't be allowed to go around too much, especially if they're early on, because this place can be a veritable death trap. But if they get to explore around just a little bit more, they get to go up the stairs just a little bit, or maybe they go into the chapel for a little bit, or maybe even if they try and go downstairs. That can add a lot of fun dynamics, especially if they get themselves into a dangerous situation, because perhaps Strahd isn't done toying with them yet. Maybe Strahd saves them from the brink of death, and then excuses them outside of the castle. And so we see over the course of the campaign, you could invite your players to Castle Ravenloft 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, maybe even more, depending on how long of a campaign you are running. And eventually your players get to build a rapport with all of the cast of Castle Ravenloft. And in addition to that, they can also build up some information on the map of Castle Ravenloft. Mind you, until the very end, they're not going to know every little nook and cranny of this place. But mind you, they can build up some great information, such as they know that the chapel is located here. They know they can easily access the upstairs from over there. And of course, they can also learn if there is a potential deadly trap or two. Dinner with Strahd should be important. Dinner with Strahd should be an absolute delight. It should be memorable, and it should allow your players to gain some added insights into the world around them. They shouldn't just go up against a big bad that they never come across, and that's the end of story. No, they should build up a rapport with the villain, because that is going to make it so much more dynamic when they finally face him in the finale. So if you have a group that loves to sit down and roleplay with the bad guys, then this works out perfectly. But what happens if you don't have a group that likes to sit down and roleplay? Well, then once they get invited and brought into the dining chamber and they go ahead and start hacking away, then they get put in their place. Between Strahd, Rahadin, and any number of brides or any other vampire spawn that show up, they can easily handle lower level characters. And that's why we want to invite them when they're lower level. Because if they are lower level, they're going to feel the fear of all these enemies surrounding them. Now, of course, it might get to a point later on where your players feel confident enough and strike out. And if that is the case, then let them. That is going to add a lot of fun tension to an already tense scenario. But no matter how it goes down in the finale, what we care about is building up those relationships with all these characters. We want these characters up and present. We want your players to remember these names and these faces, and we want your players to have a great time. I run multiple dinners with Strahd in my campaigns, and all my players seem to dig it, and I know for a fact most groups would. But you just don't think about it really, because once again, we read through that text and we see that it's just a one-time invitation. Your players show up to Ravenloft. That's that end of story. I think that Castle Ravenloft should be a lot more present in our campaigns. I think the cast of Castle Ravenloft should be a lot more present than they currently are. And I think that is going to do it for today's video. Go ahead and tell me, how do you plan on incorporating the Castle Ravenloft into your campaign? Is it going to be this looming castle that your players don't touch until the very end? Or is it something that they regularly go to and have a blast at? What about the cast of Castle Ravenloft? All those Strahd's brides, Rahadin, and Strahd himself. Are they showing up regularly in your campaign? Are they met outside in the world of Barovia? Or are they just simply locked away in this castle, never to be seen? And what about the NPCs found in the world of Barovia? Are they dragged along here as well, giving your players an opportunity to interact with people that aren't antagonists or villains of the campaign? Go ahead and tell me these things, because I would love to hear it. That is going to do it for me for this video, though. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my lovely patrons up here. You guys are absolutely fantastic. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.